All right, so we're recording. So we're pretty excited here. We got Alex Harrison with us. So we're going to kind of go around while each introduce ourselves. The way we're going to do this is we'll throw this up on our YouTube channel, but then Alex is going to throw all or part of it up on his channel as well. So Alex, go ahead. We'll let you start off and introduce yourself here, since you're the key guest.
Okay, thank you. I am a doctor of sport physiology and performance. Originally specialized in making bobsledders run really fast and push heavy sleds fast, and then transitioned over the last 7 years into coaching a lot of endurance athletes, because that's what my wife has been really into. And she's a pro cyclist and triathlete, and I'm totally recreational, so it's fun to chase her around. But yeah, I specialize now in basically teaching people how to fuel everything from like short endurance to really, really ultra long endurance.
Nice, that's great. Go ahead, John.
Perfect. Well, no bobsledding, for me. I'm scared of heights as I get older. So you guys, Justin and I are part of Feldman Physical Therapy and Performance. I've known Justin a long time. We're a PT and kind of sports performance clinic based out of New York. And Justin started the clinic and then asked me to hop on board with him a little while later, because he knew that I would make him that much better. And we are two endurance junkies ourselves. We like the middle and long course stuff, not as much. I'm a soccer player turned endurance athlete now. I just don't like people tackling me on the weekends anymore. And trying to get some more knowledge. I've been following Alex for a couple of years now, and he's got some great pearls, and finally, decided to reach out to him, learn a little bit more to improve my fueling strategies, so I can hopefully continue to race as I get older and not have to give up 2 sports instead of 1.
Yeah. So, my athletic background, I was a rower in high school and college, and got into grad school and had no more eligibility left, wasn't allowed to row anymore. And I was a swimmer as well in high school. And I got into cycling in grad school, and somebody convinced me one night at a bar that if I could run and swim, or if I could cycle and swim, then anybody could run, and I should get into triathlons. And I've been dabbling in all sorts of distances up to 70.3 until this year, when John convinced me that going for the big one was in the plans. And so I spent a ton of time going through Alex's stuff, and what I think will be interesting is sort of John and I can go through our individual cases, and I'm sure that it mirrors what a lot of other people are going through. Yeah. And so it'll be great to hear Alex's advice, on all this stuff, because really, I think what we found out in our training is that the nutrition aspect is by far a highly undervalued part of this, and it's something that I think a lot of people think they could wing until they end up in the med tent. Not talking to anybody specific, John, but
3 times.
3 med tent trips.
Nice. Yeah. The problem is
4th one, you get a special jacket, right?
Yeah, right. There's no punch card.
A straight jacket.
So I don't know. We could just sort of start by going through. Maybe I'll start. I think I have an interesting aspect that goes into my racing, in that I don't really sweat a lot, if any. And so in college, I kind of thought this was amazing, because I could do an incredibly difficult rowing workout and go right to class, and I was fine. It seemed like a great thing, until like physiology class, when everybody talked about the better condition you were in and the more physically fit you were, the more you would sweat. And then I started to get quite self-conscious. But so I often find that I don't sweat a ton, but I have to drink a ton of water on course in order to even remotely keep up with hydration. And so I'm not really sure where it's going. But my biggest weakness is that I will, in relatively cool temperatures, as I start to push my effort and push my pace, my heart rate will start to go down and I'll get the chills. And my EMT medical background recognizes that as not great. And so I start to slow down a little bit. So I don't know. We could sort of start there and see where we end up.
That's a very interesting case, and I would say fairly rare. A bit like Michelle, actually. She's a very low sweat rate. Super low sweat rate unless it's quite hot, and then she starts to push up into normal sweat rates, but she has to be working pretty hard to be like visibly sweating at all. That's interesting that you find that you need a lot of water, or you feel like your thirst is high while sweat rate is low. I'd like to hear more about that. So do you drink early and often during the race because thirst is high early, or does it sort of come on after an hour or two?
It'll generally come on after an hour or two. I find it hard to catch up. So now, as I'm older and wiser, I guess, I'm trying to drink more early and often during the race than I feel like I actually need to.
Yeah. That's good.
But it definitely comes on later.
How much, when you say you drink, you feel like you have to drink a lot? Tell me like what total fluid intake might look like for a 3-hour activity or a 5-hour activity.
I would like a 3-hour ride, like bike ride in a, relatively mild, I don't know, what was it, like in the 70s the other day when we were doing that?
Yeah.
I went through 4 22-ounce bottles of water.
Okay. I think that you're that's good. That's like, I would say a normal amount of drinking, and I think that maybe that's more than some of what you've seen other people do, and I would say that you're actually just maybe doing it better than people who are probably dramatically under consuming. I mean, if it's 70 degrees out and I'm riding, I'm probably going through like four liters in a 4-hour. Did you say 3-hour ride or 4-hour ride?
3-hour ride.
3-hour ride. So you went through 88, roughly a little shy of 3 liters. That's
a liter is like what, 32 ounces is a liter? What is it?
Gosh, I should know this off the top of my head. 36-ish.
Me too. Okay. All right.
Gosh, brain fade.
Bike bottles are just standard 24 ounces. That's all I know. I go with.
Yeah.
Except I know you posted the mass, like the bigger ones. And now my wife's like, seriously, no more bike bottles in the house. And I'm just like, but he said.
Yeah, but so 22 ounces, 4 times 22, 88. Yeah, you're talking about, I would say maybe 65th percentile of fluid consumption. And so, yeah, that's not unheard of at all. It's maybe just barely above average for what I would prescribe. And really, or just average. How much do you weigh, if you don't mind me asking?
175.
Yeah, I would say that's pretty spot on average. So if you might even be an average sweater, and it's just that you don't notice a ton when you're riding because it evaporates quickly, and maybe you live in a drier climate. I don't know. I could totally spitballing here. Where are you guys located again?
We're in like just about an hour and a half north of Manhattan, so it's generally pretty humid.
Are you actually close to Lake Placid?
3.5 hours.
Okay, got it. Okay, that's where
Poughkeepsie is usually the most common town people know around us.
Oh, I was going to say I've been to Saranac Lake and Lake Placid.
Okay.
But all up north. Anyway, yeah, 3 liters ish for 3 hours is like sort of what I recommend when I don't know anything about a person. if I think that they might need a little higher water intake. Because if I give somebody like 1.2 liters per hour, a lot of times they'll end up feeling sloshy, or it'll just feel like totally overkill if they haven't experienced it before, even if their sweat rate is 1.2 liters per hour or like much higher than that. How much sodium are you taking in with that?
Whatever's in my normal nutrition. I don't add any sodium to anything.
Okay, and what are you typically using in your bottles?
I was using Gatorade Endurance, and I switched to the Morton.
Okay, and you just put it in as prescribed, basically?
Yes. Yeah.
You got it.
Weren't you using Sport and Science too?
That was a long time ago.
Okay. For Science and Sport.
Yeah. I think Morton probably is a little underdosing sodium. I can't recall. Are they 400 milligrams per packet or 500 milligrams per packet? But basically, I think of everything in terms of hourly rate of sodium intake, hourly rate of fluid intake, and hourly rate of carb intake.
Okay.
Are you using one full packet per 22-ounce bottle?
Correct.
Okay, so that's 80 grams per bottle, 320 grams roughly for a 3-hour ride. I would say carb rate's good. Sodium's a little low.
There's sodium. So the sodium is 250 milligrams per packet. Yeah.
I was just looking that up.
Yeah.
Which packet is that though, Justin? The 160 or the 320?
The 320.
Okay.
Yeah, I would add like a quarter teaspoon of table salt to each one of those bottles.
Okay.
And you may actually feel like you don't need to drink as much because more of it may actually stay in your bloodstream and not end up in your bladder with a little bit more sodium intake.
Okay.
I don't know how often you'd be using the restroom on a 3-hour ride, but if you are at all.
Yeah, none.
Yeah. Okay. Then you might sweat more than you think.
Okay.
I would say you might sweat a little bit more than you think.
It's funny because that was sort of so we just did a race, and I noticed how much I drank and how I didn't need to use the bathroom the entire time. And when I sort of calculated the whole thing, one of the things that I was talking to John about is that I was wondering if I'm just like efficient sweating. So I'm dry.
Yeah, it's perfect.
But I'm not. So I'm assuming I'm not sweating at all, but it's just gone.
Yeah, for sure. And that's ideal. The sweat helps cool you only when the sweat that is evaporating is actually in contact with your skin and not dripping off of you.
Right.
So I would call that efficient sweating. That's good. I've never used that term before, but that's great.
Let's focus on what he's doing wrong.
Okay.
I'm just kidding.
Not a whole lot.
So I had a question about the Morton, because I know, like, watching some of your videos, you talk about, the difference between sodium citrate and, regular table salt, right? And I was looking at the salt stick tablets because that's traditionally what I was taking over the past 10 years racing, because I was like, I'll just take one every 45 minutes because that's what I've read to do or whatever, without thinking about it in conjunction with, grams and volume of fluid. But I think there's sodium citrate as well. So if we're out on the course, right, would you just recommend taking one of those? Would that be overkill?
It's hard to overkill salt. And the primary consequence of overkilling salt is that you just sweat out a little bit more salt.
Okay.
Not a lot of big consequences for overdoing it.
So it might be the most efficient way to do it. It's easier to carry tablets than a teaspoon to...
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. All right.
I typically put the sodium citrate or table salt in whatever beverage I'm consuming.
Okay.
I don't know. I would never carry like a baggie and empty it into something that's...
That's something I would do on the bike ride. Just have my teaspoon out and just have a bag of sodium citrate at home that I got to figure out what to do with.
Yeah. So the salt capsules that you're taking, those are primarily sodium citrate or exclusively sodium citrate?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's perfect. I'm I'm not sure if all of Morton's sodium comes from sodium alginate or if it's just a portion of it, and the rest coming from table salt. I don't know, maybe you have that handy.
Sodium alginate and sodium chloride.
Okay. So yes, sodium citrate would be a perfect addition to that because sodium chloride is fine. Sodium alginate is just marketing. It doesn't actually improve absorption or anything. The reason Morton tends to sit better with most folks is because they did optimize the glucose fructose ratio a bit.
Mm-hmm.
A bit better than a lot of other supplements, but it has nothing to do with the sodium alginate. It doesn't help gastric emptying rate. There's like multiple recent studies showing that.
Okay. That's good to know then. Yeah, it looks like in the 320 there's 200 grams of or milligrams of sodium in the Morton 320 mix. So
yeah.
What do you suggest is the typical? I think I was reading, you were suggesting it's like what, between 500 and 1500 milligrams of sodium, depending on how much you sweat, would be a good safe range.
Yeah. And I would, a really, for long endurance stuff, a good generic recommendation would just be 1,000 mgs of sodium per liter consumed.
Per liter consumed. Okay. That's a good way to think about it.
Yeah.
All right. So yeah, I guarantee that's something most people do not even think about.
Yeah, and if you're the more you're sweating, the faster you're sweating. Sometimes for some people, the more sodium you initially are losing in sweat because your sweat glands can't sort of hang on to the sodium at the rate the fluid's being pushed out of them. So sometimes in cases of extreme sweat rates, it actually makes sense to increase the sodium concentration of your beverage to more than 1,000 mgs per liter, up to like 1,200 or 1,500 mgs per liter, even if you're consuming more fluid. So if let's say the first 2 hours of an event, or let's just say you know that your sweat rate is going to be like 1.5 liters per hour, you're going to be losing 3 pounds of fluid per hour, super heavy sweating. You might want to consume like 1.2 to 1.5 liters per hour and 1,200 to 1,500 mgs of sodium per liter, which will put your hourly sodium consumption up like near 2,000 mgs per hour. I know that was like, I'm sure I can tell you, but
that's all right.
The big picture.
We can just rewind it later.
Yeah, we'll rewatch. I'll have to rewatch too. But the big picture. Sodium concentration of your beverage should not drop substantially as you increase the amount of fluid you're consuming every hour.
Okay. Yeah, and I think that's more of where I know have to figure out my solution. Like I'm the complete opposite where, if I think about walking up the stairs, I'm sweating already.
That's me.
Yeah. So, and I think that, I could look back at my pictures from the couple like first Ironmans I did in halves, and it's just like the white salt everywhere. So I think I was overdoing it because, to be better prepared, but I was taking in nowhere near enough fluids too. And so that's, I think that's the part that's really the other, crucial end of it. And I think a lot of people, like I was watching your video where you said, like a lot of people say like, oh, that stuff doesn't work for me. That stuff causes me gut distress. When in reality, you're probably just not drinking, and like sugar is sugar, like, just like grams of glucose or glucose, it's just different, products being marketed. You're probably just not taking in enough water or a little bit of extra salt with it. And that's, I don't even understand why that would work, but I'm going to try it.
Sweet. Yeah, it works. It works for a couple of reasons. First reason is more water with the carbs just keeps the concentration of what you're consuming a bit lower, which is easier on your gut. If it's closer to that like 6 to 10% concentration, that's like 60 grams of carbs to 100 grams of carbs per liter. That'll be a little bit easier on your gut acutely, but then consuming more water chronically throughout the event also just keeps you at a sort of higher hydration status. And when you're more hydrated, your gut functions better. and can both absorb higher hourly rates of carbs and higher concentrations of carbs in your beverage.
Okay. What about the salt? Because I know you were saying that if you do have gut distress, like, try having significantly more fluids with it to dilute it, I guess. But then, like, how much? I think in the video you're saying, like, try more fluids and a little extra salt. Like, what would you say would be the little extra salt? Is it that teaspoon that you were just talking about?
Yeah, I guess it depends on where folks are starting, but I'm trying to imagine. I don't know if I can imagine a scenario where I'd be talking about hydration with somebody and having them ever do less than like 700 milligrams of sodium per liter. So that's roughly, like, if you're going to consume that Morton alongside a liter, that's roughly a quarter teaspoon of table salt or a half a teaspoon of sodium citrate.
Okay.
To get an additional 500 on top of that 200 from the Morton.
Oh, you're saying, so 700 milligrams per liter is the low end. That's the floor that you would.
Yeah.
Gotcha. All right. That's a good starting point.
On a recovery ride, like when sweat rates are low or it's like cold out and it's a super chill ride. You don't need to be doing 700 mgs per liter. You can do like 200 mgs per liter and be just fine.
Okay. That's like fall riding or running around here for us.
Say that again.
That's like the fall, like when it gets like super chilly out. Because like the first couple times I did Florida, and I'm training into like October, November, and it's definitely not as hot. I'm not sweating as much. So
yeah.
All right.
That just actually brings up a great point. Go ahead.
No, you go.
Good.
Oh, I was going to say that brings up a really good point. If you are in the north and you're training for events in the south, heat acclimation training is going to be like probably more important than your actual fitness on the day.
Okay. That's a conversation for a different time then.
I'm curious a little bit more about that, only because I feel like that is one thing that we run into here is that it doesn't always get incredibly hot, but it does appear that on days where there's big races, it will be significantly hotter than the 2 or 3 weeks leading into it,
and more humid.
Yeah, which is mostly just bad luck. But as far as heat acclimation training, do you mind talking or explaining a little bit more about what you mean there? Because I think that would be helpful, like year round.
Yeah. And this is right now is like the time of the year where everybody is experiencing the effects of increasing temperatures without having acclimatized to it a lot, because the temperatures are like on their fastest increase sort of like in late spring. We've all been like maybe outside in the spring for the first time, actually getting less heat acclimatized, because in the winter, if you're on an indoor trainer or running on the treadmill, you're sweating a ton, you're actually getting kind of heat acclimatized from doing indoor training. Then when we go outside, at least in the Pacific Northwest where I'm from, you start to go outside and you actually lose your heat acclimation during like April, because temperatures are cold, you're cold all the time, it's raining in Washington. And then when like June comes around, temperatures are high again, and all of a sudden you have lost some of that plasma volume from heat acclimation, and plasma volume helps you thermoregulate better when it's hot. So yeah, right now it's really relevant to a lot of people. How to heat acclimatize? The simple answer is probably 7 to 10 days in a row of zone 1, zone 2, like low intensity cardio activity, really, really hot, like sweating buckets. You max out your sweat rate. You don't have to max it out, but it works fine. Indoor trainer without a fan, sometimes with the heater on for like 60 minutes, sweat 1 to 2 liters per hour, and drink to replace that. Of course, like use good nutrition while you're doing it, but it doesn't take hard workouts in the heat, and it doesn't take long workouts in the heat. It just takes repeat exposure to heat. ideally on sequential days. Really easy stuff. But it'll make an enormous difference when you actually go to a hot environment.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if you're in the middle of a training block, it's probably good to plan that for like a deload week or something where, you don't have to worry about planning days off and increasing intensity, stuff like that.
Yeah. And honestly, like the week of a race, when Michelle had to travel from Washington to Tennessee for cycling nationals, I think the last like 10 days of her training were just heat training, like all zone 1, zone 2, letting her recover from all the like intensity stuff, which we don't do a whole ton of anyway, but from the intensity stuff. And then she performed super well, but it was like 10 days in a row of really just sweating a lot on our RV living room floor, which is, I don't know if I mentioned yet, I'm in an RV.
Yep. That's awesome. All right, Justin, did you have anything specific next?
Well, I was gonna wonder about a little bit more about the glucose to fructose ratio, because I think until I came across a lot of your content, that wasn't something that I ever really paid attention to. I mean, I was always guilty of, I call myself like slightly lazy, where I would essentially train with whatever nutrition products were going to be on the course because I didn't want to carry anything. And so I was paying less attention to any of that stuff and more attention to what meant I didn't have to hold anything in my pockets. But now as I look back, I mean, a lot of the stuff that's on the course is maybe what has better marketing or what's pushing more brand than anything else.
Yeah, potentially. Depends on the race.
Yeah.
I think, well, for starters, I guess I should talk about like what is the glucose fructose ratio?
Yeah.
Why does it? Basically, your gut can absorb more carbohydrate more comfortably if you have an optimal amount of glucose and fructose, which are two monosaccharides. And we actually have a video coming out on that. My wife just recorded it. It might come out today, maybe tomorrow. But glucose and fructose are monosaccharides, and if you have an optimal ratio of those two, your gut can absorb more total carbohydrate per hour than if you were to just consume glucose alone. And that includes glucose from all sources, meaning maltodextrin, highly branched cyclic dextrin, sucrose is 50% glucose, dextrose is glucose outside the body. The optimal ratio is, well, for a long time was thought to be 2-to-1. And there's really good evidence that it's not 2-to-1. It's somewhere between 2-to-1 and 1-to-1 glucose to fructose. So you want somewhere between twice as much glucose as fructose and the same amount of glucose as fructose. Michelle and I generally opt, and all of our clients opt for pretty darn close to 1-to-1 because the reason is twofold. There's good evidence that your gut adapts to fructose intake over time and becomes better at absorbing fructose when you consume a lot of fructose during training. And number two, when you consume fructose in the presence of a lot of glucose, fructose uptake is, even without any gut training, is improved. Meaning the old research that came out in like the late 90s saying if you consume just fructose, you can only consume 30 grams of carbs per hour. And if anybody consumes ever more than 30 grams of fructose per hour during exercise, they are guaranteed to get gut distress. That's not the case. There's a glucose-mediated pathway that allows fructose to be absorbed alongside glucose at a faster rate than fructose would be absorbed alone.
And so just get more bang for your buck.
Yeah. So
yeah,
the simple answer.
Yeah. No, I was going to say, and you said, whereas it thought to be like 90 grams per hour would be like that benchmark, but you want people up to like 130 grams of carbs per hour, right?
Yeah. Yep. So I routinely have like higher fitness, sometimes larger athletes like myself, but also Michelle will often do 120 grams per hour for rides in like the 2 to 4 hour range, even 2 to 5 hours. She'll do 120 grams an hour. And the reason I say 2 to 5 hours or even 2 to 6 hours is if you go longer than 6 hours, hydration starts to play a bigger role in performance, and it's more likely that over time on a 6 hour ride, you're starting to accumulate dehydration than in, say, a 3 hour ride. And if you push super high carbs when you're dehydrated, you're more likely to have gut distress. So that's why I don't recommend like 130 grams of carbs out to 10, 12, 15, 17 hours. That said, there are people that can do like 130 to 140 for a full Ironman. It's just a little bit, and it takes like pretty precise implementation.
So then if we're looking like for Placid, right? I mean, it's going to be a hilly bike course. You know, I imagine I'm going to be out there for like 6.5 hours. That's probably my anticipated, you know, ride time. Are you saying, should I taper off towards the end of the bike? Like I can try like 120 per hour in the beginning, and then towards the end, maybe go to like 100 or so. Okay. So you don't average that out and say, well, instead of like 120 times 6, you just do the average of that and just break it down a little bit, just taper it off towards the end.
Yeah. And I would say that the simplest advice is, yeah, do the same hourly carb rate. But if you are like thinking about it and being sort of on top of it intellectually, yeah, you can definitely target 120 early on, taper down to 100. Most of all, just be able to listen to what your gut is telling you. And there might be times where you're like, well, I kind of messed up the hydration game there. I need to get back on track with hydration before I start pushing 120 again, or maybe I just will be done with 120 for the rest of the race. And with 90 or even 80. If you get in trouble where you're having like serious gut distress, you might be wise to drop it to 80.
Okay. And then, but keep the same amount of fluids, right?
Yeah. Again, listening to your gut and thirst. Yeah.
Okay.
There are times where, or there have been times where I find myself, especially like if I do a climb and I'm like feeling like I want to put out power on the climb and maybe limit consumption because I'm breathing really hard, I'll get a little bit hypoglycemic. I'll overconsume carbohydrates after that. And it like hits my gut like a rock because I waited a bit too long, got a little bit dehydrated, and then tried to do too much carbs at once. And then like what you want to do is max out hydration focus when you've made that mistake, but sometimes your gut just won't tolerate anything. So you kind of have to like sip water to get your gut to calm down.
That's a good point. And then what about moving on to the run then? Like should you be targeting for like a multi-sport event the same amount of grams per hour for running as, you know, cycling?
Theoretically, maybe. But I think in practice, most people should probably limit carbs to 90 grams an hour while they're running, especially when they've been out there for 7, 8, 10 hours already. Limiting 80 or 90 grams of carbs per hour is probably a good idea. And especially if you've gotten dehydrated, you know you're behind on your hydration. Yeah, you might have to be limiting to like 60 grams of carbs per hour.
So that's something I was doing different too, is if I was ever feeling sluggish or like behind the 8 ball there, I'm like, oh, I'm just getting more calories in me to get more energy. But if that's the exact opposite of what you should do too.
If it works, the big question is your gut tolerating it?
Okay.
So if your stomach feels fine, absolutely slam calories.
Yeah. Okay. That works.
What else?
Well, and so one thing is like when you're talking about focusing on the hydration, just to go back to like what we were talking about in the beginning, that's with the sodium content in that water though.
That's correct.
Correct,
yep.
Right? Yeah. So I think that's also a big thing because a lot of people on the course will say, oh, I feel GI distress or whatever, and they'll grab just the bottles of water and just start pounding bottles of water, and then they keep diluting that sodium.
Yeah. And sometimes when you've got a high concentration of stuff in your gut, because of a mistake you made, like gel without water, a couple of gels without water, that kind of thing. Yeah, sipping plain water is a good idea. But yeah, ideally, some electrolyte content of that water is probably smarter.
That's good.
Yeah. Curious as to what does that, as you get into hotter temperatures, does that change it, like what people are able to consume significantly?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Yeah.
That was actually exactly what I was working on before we got on this call. I was trying to figure out how to scale the sort of the extreme edge cases for the app that I'm working on. Yeah, making sure that in cases of extreme hydration need, that carb intakes are appropriate and not overdone. Because yes, in heat, yeah, for one, simply having a higher core temperature probably compromises things, but most of all, just becoming dehydrated compromises things. And there are many cases where you're going to become dehydrated to some degree, and you're going to have to live with the loss of gut function that comes with that. Like if you're sweating 2 liters per hour, there are very few people who are going to be able to maintain their hydration status because they can't consume 2 liters per hour and pass it through their gut.
Right.
And so in those cases, a lot of times you'll have to drop to like 50, 60 grams of carbs per hour for like the entire second half of your race, just because you're so dehydrated. Hydration becomes kind of like the only focus at that point. And when I say hydration with sodium.
With sodium. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the big key there.
Yeah. I think that's a big thing that people miss a lot.
Yeah, well, not only that, I just think a lot of people don't drink enough. I mean, there's so many recreational athletes around us that we work with, and they say like, "Oh yeah, I don't need to drink that much. I'm good without it," and it just messes with my stomach, so I just go for it. In my head, I'm like, I mean, you're not Superman, you're not Superwoman, or at least maybe some of you are, but not everybody is.
Yeah.
And so, like, you feel like you're okay, but the advice to them should still be consume more water, get more carbs in you, and definitely more sodium.
Yeah, I would say come see me in 3.5 hours because that's when I go on rides with the one bottle guy who just brings the 122-ounce bottle on the ride.
Oh, have you gone riding with John too?
Yeah. Yeah, 3.5 hours in, that guy's fading.
Yeah.
I don't know, Justin. We finish at the same time every time.
I'm just waiting for you because I have the directions.
So the overall goal fluid intake, like what's the best way to determine that, right? So we've talked about like the target grams per hour, target sodium, per liter consumed, but then how do we, like, what's the best way to figure out, I guess starting with a benchmark, right? Where it's like not too humid. We're talking like 75 degrees, regular humidity, like what should target fluid consumption be for, I guess Justin doesn't sweat a whole lot, or he's just efficient at sweating. Whereas me, I'm super inefficient at sweating, and I'm creating a pool where I stand.
Yeah. That's the $1 million question.
Okay.
Person who answers that well and solves it easily for everybody is going to be a millionaire.
Okay.
Gatorade's trying really hard with their sweat patch stuff, but I think that they're doing better selling sweat patches than they are actually solving it.
Okay.
So, that's right. We're not sponsored by anybody, the least of which in Gatorade. So
yeah,
we can speak candidly here.
Yeah. So yeah, that's what I've been hammering away at. How to answer that simply?
Drink more.
Yeah. Well, yes. The consequence of drinking too much can be 2 things. 1, hyponatremia. If you don't have enough sodium, then that can kill you. 2, you can just pee a lot. If you do have enough sodium, eventually you'll hold more water and you'll be totally safe because you've consumed enough sodium with that water, but you will end up like having to stop to pee every 30 to 45 minutes if you're really like over consuming fluid.
Who says you have to stop?
Yeah, you can just go on the way.
I just wait till somebody starts drafting off of me and I'm like, all right, fine.
Yeah, there you go. Let's see. So you don't want to underconsume because then you lose blood volume and then you lose thermoregulation ability. So you actually get worse at thermoregulation, and then you end up losing even more fluid faster. Performance goes down. It's like a vicious cycle. So optimizing it, basically you have to consider all of the factors that are going to influence your sweat rate. And it'd be really nice if there was such a thing as reliable sweat testing, but it's totally not reliable, and it changes dramatically depending on, well, 100 things about the conditions, but also where you place the sweat patch, your training status, the amount of fluid that you drank yesterday, the amount of fluid you're currently drinking, your clothing, radiant heat, like the list is long. So sweat testing doesn't really answer the question of how much am I sweating right now. It answers the question of how much did I sweat then. And
right.
It'd be very different.
It's a good way to put it.
Meaningfully different. So the best approach is to listen to your thirst cues and try to stay slightly ahead of them. So if you're getting thirsty, like, it's probably time to drink 16 ounces of water if you can stomach it with sufficient sodium. But stay slightly ahead of it and then have high enough sodium that you're not at risk for hyponatremia. How do I condense thousands of lines of code into succinct? Yeah. So basically what I've been doing is I have all these factors that I'm including, like body size, how heavily a person reports themselves to be, or how heavy of a sweater a person reports themselves to be. What else? Yeah, weather conditions, how much they think they're going to sweat on the day. And basically trial and error with large numbers of people, getting it dialed so that, the app is helping a lot of the few beta testers that I have using it. And the range, the fluid intake range is somewhere between 200 and 2,000 milliliters per hour. And only like, range. Yeah, only like the largest folks who are going very hard in very hot environments will ever be anywhere near like 1800 mils per hour. And then only on very cool, very easy recovery rides for like low sweat rate folks will they ever see 200 mils per hour. But like, yeah, the generic recommendation is like 700 to 1,000 mils. Okay. Listen to your thirst. If it feels like your gut's sloshy, slow it down.
Okay.
That makes sense.
I think our plan for Placid was going to be like a bottle every 45 minutes, which would, yeah. So then,
if you're the sweat a pool guy, and you have sweat dripping off you occasionally, I would aim higher than that.
Okay.
Yeah, I would aim like maybe every 40 minutes, 38 minutes.
Okay. Yeah, and then just swap it out, grab from the aid station, just make sure we have enough fluids there.
Yeah.
I think the plan for us was going to be having one big bottle of Morton with the grams that we needed, like the 320s per hour, plus maybe an additional Morton gel or one of their bars or something to get us up to that like 110-ish, like 120 grams per hour, and then supplement with like additional fuel, like water from the aid station or something like that. But if that might be the easiest way for us to do it. And then at the halfway point, the special needs, just grab our next setup and do it again, rinse and repeat.
Perfect. Yeah, that I think you guys are nailing the carbs. It can be done with Morton, or you can, honestly, you can do it with pretty much any supplement on the market and just add either maltodextrin or sucrose.
I think for ease, I mean, because I was looking Gatorade Endurance on the course too. They also do the combination of glucose and fructose, but the problem is they're not getting anywhere near as many grams of carbs in the concentration as Morton gives us. And so I think their 320 packets just end up being far more efficient for us. And if we start our bike with a bottle and we have 2 bottles in the back and then rinse and repeat at special needs, it's a lot easier than trying to consume as much Gatorade Endurance as we need on the course. Because I don't know, I personally think the on-course stuff tastes much different than the powder anyway for Gatorade Endurance.
Yeah, you're talking about those prepackaged, the pre-made bottles, plastic bottles.
Yeah. I love the Gatorade Endurance powder. I hate the pre-made bottles from Gatorade Endurance.
Yeah, and they're not concentrated enough anyway.
No, that's what I'm saying. It's going to be tough to get the right amount of grams of carbs in, and for math purposes too, it just makes it nicer. Like a bottle an hour of the Morton, and then just make sure we get more fluid in. If we're talking like 1 liter of fluids with enough sodium or appropriate sodium every like 38-40 minutes.
Yep,
that could be good.
Sweet.
All right, time to win the thing.
That's right. No, I like it. I mean, I think we probably already covered it, but I would be curious, Alex, if you were to like pick, I remember years ago they did this study on golfers, and they were sort of looking at like what the one thing that a like recreational golfer could do to improve their score would be. Yeah. And they studied like a ton of different stuff, and I don't remember where I even saw this, but basically at the end, they, whether it was like buying clubs or lessons and all this stuff, and at the end it was drink more water while you were playing.
Huh. That's funny.
And they basically determined that like their hand-eye coordination was off by like the back 9 because they were slightly dehydrated.
Yeah.
But so I would be curious if there was like one thing that you would say a recreational endurance athlete should be doing that they're probably not, or that they might be doing wrong that they think they're doing right, what that would be.
Yeah, that's good. Gosh, there's such a wide spectrum. I have clients that I think probably overconsume water because back maybe in the 90s there was or maybe 80s there was a really big push for like hydration, just drink lots of water. And then I have clients that like have no idea that it's bad to consume 10 to 12 ounces per hour, and they're just totally wrecked by the end of the races. And a lot of times it's folks that start out not knowing a whole lot, don't realize how much they need to be consuming, so their hourly intake might be like 15 to 40 grams of carbs per hour, 200 to 400 milliliters of fluid per hour, and like 100 to 200 milligrams of sodium per hour. And then they find out like, oh my gosh, I'm under consuming. And they come back and they're consuming still the same amount of carbs and sodium, but they've increased their water to like 1 liter per hour. And they're wondering like why they're super swollen after the race. So I think it's the hard answer is learn hourly rates that are appropriate for carbs, sodium, and fluid.
That's pretty good.
Yeah. No, I like it. Yeah, I don't know. I don't have any other questions. Anything else you wanted to make sure we covered, Alex? Thoughts?
We've hit a lot of the good stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. No. I took a lot of notes. I was watching your videos over the weekend. I got my
sweet
my pad here with all that, trying to make sure I could prepare and understand, the topics we're going to be going through. So no, it's awesome. Makes a big difference. I know for me, this is exactly what, was my issue in the past. And, I can at least feel better now going into this one.
Sweet.
Yeah.
No,
and training rides too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. No, I think this is something that, over the years, just from like playing with it differently and going through it, it's amazing how little times people spend on the nutrition aspect of it, and how big of a difference it makes. you know, and you see people have a bad race and they're like, you know, course was tough and this and that. And, you know, no one ever really dials back into that nutrition aspect of what sort of was going on.
Yeah, I think people do tend to underestimate it.
All right. So one other question, kind of wondering, as far as hydration goes, how much does the amount that you're consuming hydration and sodium wise not during the race, you know, days leading up, how does that affect you on race day?
Not as much as most folks would like, and probably not as much as carbohydrate loading might affect things, which is also a small effect. But really, like 2 days, 3 days before, hydration has very little effect on race day performance, because water flux is so rapid in and out of your bloodstream. Now, 3 hours before the event probably has a really big effect. I think the biggest pitfall that I see people make is they decide they want to hydrate a lot, and so they drink a bunch more water before the race. They wash out all their sodium and end up actually not holding the water that they consume. So they actually show up the morning of the race having lost some sodium, lost the ability to hold water, and actually a little bit dehydrated from all that water they consumed yesterday. So yeah, if you're gonna load up on water, load up on sodium too, and then don't stop consuming sodium until after the race. Consume it all the way through the morning of the race, during the race, and then after the race, you can get back on a normal sodium level.
Got it.
Perfect.
No, that's great.
Yeah.
Super helpful. Well, I appreciate your time and going through all this. So what we're going to do is we're going to throw this up on our YouTube channel. So everyone, if you made it this far into the end, then we're going to have a link down to Alex's channel down below. So definitely make sure you go check out all the rest of his videos and jump down there. You can subscribe to his channel through there. And yeah, appreciate everything.
And again, guys, this is Dr. Alex Harrison, PhD in sports physiology and performance, and his content's definitely worth it.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah.
No problem. Thank you, man, for your time and help.